Let's be honest for a moment. When we think about 1960s muscle cars, a very clear image usually comes to mind. Aggressive lines, muscular proportions, and a presence that scream power even while standing still. Cars designed to look fast, to intimidate, to impress. But what happens when a muscle car doesn't fit that image? Today we're talking about those muscle cars, machines that divided opinions, that never won beauty contests, but delivered performance capable of humiliating rivals that were far more admired visually. And make no mistake, this isn't about calling these cars ugly for the sake of it. It's about understanding why their design was so controversial, and why, despite that, they earned a place in history thanks to what truly matters when you turn the key. So, let's begin with a muscle car that made one thing very clear from day one. It was never meant to please everyone. 1966 Dodge Charger. This car occupies a very curious place in muscle car history. Today the Charger name is sacred, associated with some of the most admired silhouettes of all time. But that reputation did not begin with this first generation. In fact, when the Charger first appeared, it was met with a fair amount of confusion. Its design was radical for the era. The tall, long, fastback body didn't quite fit the classic muscle car image the public was beginning to form. While other models leaned toward more compact and aggressive profiles, the Charger looked large, heavy, and visually complex. To many, it didn't immediately communicate sportiness. To others, it simply looked strange. The interior also broke conventions. Instead of a traditional rear bench seat, Dodge went with a 4 individual seats layout, something more typical of a European Grand Tourer than an American muscle car. It was a car that didn't follow clear rules. And in a decade where identity meant everything, that worked against it. But beneath that debated bodywork was a true beast. The first-generation Charger could be equipped with serious V8 engines, including the 383 V8 producing around 330 horsepower, and in special versions, the legendary 4.2-6HEMI, capable of well over 425 horsepower at a time when that number was simply outrageous. It was fast, stable at highway speeds, and far more capable than its appearance suggested. The issue was never performance, it was perception. Many buyers didn't know how to classify it. It wasn't as obviously muscular as later Chargers, nor as traditionally elegant as other large coupes of the era. That aesthetic ambiguity caused this first generation to be overshadowed for years, even by its own successors. Over time, that same visual oddity became part of its appeal. Today, the 1966 Charger is seen as a bold experiment, a car ahead of its time, one that dared to break the formula before the formula was fully defined. 1968 AMC AMX. This is one of those muscle cars that almost always triggers an immediate reaction, and almost never indifference. From the moment it was introduced, it was clear this wasn't a car designed to please everyone. Its proportions broke with everything the public expected from an American muscle car in the late 1960s. Unlike its rivals, the AMX was extremely short, wide, and compact. Visually, it looked compressed, as if someone had cut a traditional muscle car in half. To some, that made it aggressive and distinctive. To others, it made it strange, unbalanced, and hard to read. It lacked the elegance of a long coupe and the classic presence of a well-defined fastback. That unconventional design wasn't a mistake, it was intentional. AMC wanted to create something different, a muscle car focused more on agility than sheer size. The problem was that the market still associated power with big, long, visually heavy cars. The AMX went directly against that logic, and that created skepticism from day one. Mechanically, however, there was no reason for doubt. The AMX offered very serious V8 engines, including 390 cubic inch blocks producing well over 300 horsepower. In a straight line, it was fast, forceful, and surprisingly effective. In corners, it felt more planted and controlled than many larger muscle cars. It was a car that performed better than its looks suggested. Because of that unusual combination, the AMX was never a mass-market success. It didn't fit neatly into any clear category. It wasn't a pony car, it wasn't full-size, and it didn't follow the classic muscle car aesthetic mold. That limited its sales and, over time, made it far rarer than many people realize today. With the years, what was once a visual liability became part of its identity. The AMC AMX never tried to be beautiful by traditional standards. It tried to be different, and it succeeded. And while its design still divides opinions, its performance was never in question. 1966, Oldsmobile 442. Today, this name is directly associated with respect, power, and a rock-solid reputation in the muscle car world. But the early versions from the mid-1960s did not receive that status automatically. In fact, for quite some time, the 442 carried a constant criticism. Its appearance didn't seem to match what it offered mechanically. Unlike other muscle cars that leaned into aggressive lines or flashy visual details, the early 442 had a surprisingly serious design. It was tall, boxy, with flat surfaces, and a silhouette closer to a muscular family sedan than a car meant to dominate the street. For many people, it didn't spark excitement. It looked too proper, too formal, almost conservative. That contrast played a major role in how part of the public viewed it with skepticism. At a time when design was becoming a clear statement of intent, the 442 didn't seem to shout anything. It didn't intimidate visually. It didn't provoke. It was simply there, solid, heavy, and discreet. And that led many to underestimate what it really was, because beneath that sober bodywork lived one of the most serious mechanical packages of its era. It included engines like the 400 cubic inch V8, producing around 350 horsepower and delivering massive torque from low RPM. Over time, that conservative styling ended up working in its favor. While other designs aged poorly or became excessive, the Oldsmobile 442 remained a muscle car with clean, almost industrial lines, today seen as an expression of strength without gimmicks. But back then, that same restraint was often interpreted as a lack of visual character. And here I want your opinion. Do you think a muscle car needs to look aggressive to earn respect? Or does the Oldsmobile 442 prove that true personality comes from how it drives, not how it looks? Leave your answer in the comments. 1968, Mercury Cyclone. This is a muscle car that always seemed to be searching for an identity and never quite found it. Not because it lacked power, and not because it was mechanically inferior to its rivals, but because its exterior design failed to clearly communicate what it really was. At first glance, the Cyclone had something unsettling about it. The front end, with its long and somewhat undefined nose, didn't project immediate aggression. The sidelines felt too smooth for a car meant to compete in the high-performance arena, and the overall shape sat somewhere between an elegant coupe and a serious muscle car. For many buyers, that visual ambiguity alone was enough to dismiss it. The problem was timing. Mercury was stuck between Ford and Lincoln, and that position was reflected directly in its products. The Cyclone wasn't as popular as a Mustang, nor as prestigious as a Lincoln, and its design didn't help it stand out in a market increasingly crowded with more visually aggressive alternatives. Mechanically, however, the Cyclone was anything but weak. Depending on the version, it could be equipped with very serious V8 engines, including high-performance blocks shared with Ford, capable of brutal acceleration and genuinely impressive top speeds. In pure performance terms, it was fully competitive with any late 1960s muscle car. Ironically, most of the criticism aimed at it was purely aesthetic. It didn't look as fast as it really was. It didn't look as aggressive as it behaved. And in an era where image sold just as much as numbers, that became a silent sentence. Today, the Mercury Cyclone is remembered as one of those muscle cars judged far too harshly for its looks. A powerful, well-built, capable machine that simply failed to communicate its true personality at first glance. And if the Cyclone felt visually confusing, the next car on the list had a different problem altogether. It was too tall, too serious, and too proper to convince people it was a muscle car, despite having all the right hardware to be one. 1969 Dodge Super B. The Super B was born with a very clear, and for many, brutally honest philosophy. It wasn't here to be pretty. It was here to be fast, affordable, and effective. And that straightforward design decision is exactly what made it one of the most visually controversial muscle cars of the late 1960s. At first glance, it almost looked too simple. Straight lines, minimal decoration, and a body that felt like it had been designed with zero concern for elegance. To some, it was crude. To others, downright ugly. It lacked the refinement of a Charger and the imposing presence of a GTX. It looked unfinished, as if Dodge had stripped away everything that wasn't strictly necessary. And in a way, that's exactly what they did. The Super Bee was created as a direct response to the market. Deliver maximum performance at the lowest possible price. Anything that didn't contribute to speed or power was removed or simplified. The result was a visually raw, almost utilitarian muscle car with absolutely savage mechanical credentials. Under the hood, it could house true monsters, including engines like the 383 Magnum and, in more extreme configurations, the legendary 446-pack, pushing close to 390 horsepower, figures that placed it among the fastest muscle cars of its time. In a straight line, this car didn't ask for permission. It launched hard, pulled aggressively, and made it clear that its mission wasn't to please the eye, but to dominate the pavement. For years, the contrast between its plain appearance and its brutal performance was hard for many buyers to accept. Some saw it as a cheap muscle car, in the worst sense of the word. Others, however, understood exactly what Dodge was offering: pure power with no makeup. Today, the very styling that was once criticized has become a core part of its identity. The Super Bee represents the most honest, no-nonsense side of American muscle, where design doesn't try to seduce, it simply follows the mechanics. It may not be elegant, but it's authentic to the core. 1967 Plymouth GTX. This car has always carried a curious reputation. Mechanically, it was flawless, powerful, serious, and brutally capable. But visually, it never achieved the same consensus as other muscle cars of its era. For many people, it simply looked too restrained for how savage it really was. Unlike more aggressive or flashy models, the GTX went for a controlled, almost corporate design. Its lines were clean, straight, and correct. Maybe too correct. It didn't scream muscle car at first glance, and that led many to see it as generic, especially when placed next to visually louder rivals. That discreet appearance, however, hid a completely different personality. The GTX was never shy or mild. Plymouth positioned it as a muscle car for buyers who wanted real performance without visual exaggeration. It was raw power dressed in a serious suit. Under the hood, it offered engines that spoke for themselves, such as the 440 Super Commando, and, in more extreme versions, the feared 426 HEMI. Acceleration was brutal, torque was overwhelming, and straight-line performance was simply savage. It didn't need styling tricks, because the mechanical package did all the talking. What's interesting is that this visual seriousness was, for years, one of its biggest commercial problems. Many buyers preferred cars that looked as fast as they actually were. The GTX, by contrast, looked almost conservative for the level of performance it delivered, and that costed attention next to more emotional designs. Today, that same restraint is seen very differently. The GTX represents another way of understanding the muscle car. Less visual spectacle, more substance. It may not win everyone over with its looks, but no one questions that it's one of the most respectable and authentic muscle cars of its generation. And what comes next pushes aesthetic controversy even further, because the next model took design decisions to a point where there was no middle ground at all. You either love it, or you simply don't understand it. 1969 AMC Rebel. This is one of those muscle cars that never tried to please everyone. From the moment it was launched, it was uncomfortable, provocative, and visually hard to digest for many people. Not because it was poorly designed, but because it completely broke with what the public expected from an American muscle car in the late 1960s. The Rebel had a strange silhouette, somewhat awkward proportions, less fluid lines, and a front end that didn't clearly communicate aggression or elegance. To some, it looked messy. To others, just plain weird. It lacked the muscular presence of a Chevelle and the drama of a Charger. It was different, and that difference worked against it. AMC was never a comfortable brand within the Detroit ecosystem, and the Rebel perfectly reflected that position. It didn't follow trends, it didn't try to appeal to the majority, and it didn't attempt to visually compete with the giants. It felt like a car designed by engineers, not by marketing departments. And that's where the real clash happened. Under the hood, the Rebel was anything but strange. It carried a high-compression 390 cubic inch V8 that delivered brutal power for its size and weight. In straight-line acceleration, it could take on far more famous muscle cars without hesitation. It was fast, forceful, and surprisingly effective. But its appearance didn't tell that story. That disconnect between form and function became its biggest commercial issue. Many buyers didn't understand what they were looking at. It didn't look beautiful, it didn't look clearly aggressive, and it came from a brand already burdened with prejudice. The result was limited production and a short commercial life. Today, the AMC Rebel is viewed through a different lens. Its design is no longer judged by the standards of its time, but as a unique statement from a manufacturer willing to go against the current. It's not an easy car, nor a visually friendly one, but precisely because of that, it has a personality no other muscle car ever managed to replicate. 1969, Ford Torino, Talladega. This car was not designed to be liked, it was designed to win, and that changes everything. Its strange, stretched, and awkward-looking shape wasn't a styling mistake or a bad design decision. It was the direct result of Ford's obsession with dominating NASCAR in the late 1960s. At first glance, the Talladega looks odd. The front end is excessively long, the grille seems pulled forward, and the proportions don't match what you expect from a traditional muscle car. To many enthusiasts, it was simply ugly. It had no classic aggression and no elegance. It almost looked unnatural, as if someone had stretched the car without caring about aesthetics. And in reality, that's exactly what happened. Ford needed a more aerodynamic car than the competition, and the Talladega was the answer. Every extra inch of the nose, every smooth surface, every unconventional line had a functional reason. It wasn't built for the street or showroom appeal. It was built to run at over 190 miles per hour on endless oval tracks. Under the hood, the Torino Talladega was fitted with massive V8 engines, including the 428 Cobra jet, officially rated at 335 horsepower, though most people knew it was producing significantly more in real-world conditions. The problem was that, off the track, the public didn't know how to react. Many couldn't understand why Ford was selling a car that looked so strange. It didn't resemble a classic muscle car, it didn't look luxurious, and it didn't feel sporty in the traditional sense. It was a race tool legalized for the street, and that made it an uncomfortable product for the market. Today, the Torino Talladega is a cult car. Its design is no longer judged as ugly or beautiful, but as honest. Every line has a purpose. Every visual oddity tells a story of extreme competition. It's one of those cars that can only exist when engineering leads and design is forced to follow. And with that, we reach the end of this journey through some of the most misunderstood muscle cars of the 1960s. Cars that were never designed to fit a universal idea of beauty, but to serve a very specific purpose. What's fascinating is that none of these cars were truly mistakes. Each one represents a decision, a moment in time, and a different way of understanding American muscle. And maybe that's where their real charm lies. While many muscle cars tried to be perfect, these dared to be different. And because of that, they still generate debate, divided opinions, and passionate conversations like the ones we have here. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Which of all the muscle cars we talked about today do you think is the most misunderstood? Is there one you appreciate more today than people did back then? Or one you'll never be able to accept visually? Leave it in the comments, because these kinds of cars always spark very different points of view. And if you're curious to see the other side of the story, where elegant design hid unexpected power, you need to watch the next video on the channel. There, we talk about the fastest luxury coupes of the 1960s, true sleepers that looked calm until they accelerated. It's the perfect complement to fully understand the complexity of American muscle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.